6, 3 work together. We have 2 steps. Our first step says on April 30th of the current year, Fix It Now has completed the trial balance columns and the adjustment columns of the worksheet. We need to extend the up-to-date balances to the balance sheet or income statement columns and then total each column. So first what we're going to do is we're going to start with our balance sheet. Remember, our balance sheet is assets, liabilities, and owner's equity. It is our accounting equation. So that is going to be these accounts here, cash through drawing. And so I'm going to start with cash. I have a debit of $4,900, so I have a debit of $4,900. Remember, I'm simply pulling these numbers all the way across. Debit of $75, debit of $1,387. Here, when I come to my supplies, I have a debit of $228, and then I have a credit. So if I have a debit and a credit, I'm going to subtract. I have a credit of $153. That tells me my new balance is a $75 debit. The reason that it is a debit balance is because my debit number is larger. I have the same thing when I come across prepaid insurance. I start with $375 as a debit. I then have a credit, so I need to subtract $125. Since my debit number is larger, I now have a debit balance of $250. Okay, accounts payable has a credit balance of $267. Capital credit $7,443, and drawing is a debit of $1,700. Okay, income summary is easy. There is no balance, so I don't have to pull it over. Remember, this income summary is where I'm going to switch over to my income statement accounts. Okay, so next account that I see is my sales. Sales is revenue. Income statement includes revenue and expenses. So now I see my sales. I'm starting here. I have a credit. So I'm going to go to my credit column, $2,160. And then I have a debit of $460. A debit of $6. Here I start with a zero balance, and then I come across a debit of $125. So I'm simply going to have a debit balance of $125. Miscellaneous, I have a debit of $189. Supplies expense, again, I start with a zero balance, and then I have a debit of $153. Now I have a debit balance of $153. And last one, utilities, is going to be a debit of $550. It does say too that we need to total each column. So we're going to start with our income statement debit column. Get out your calculator if you don't have it out. I'm going to add up my debit column on my income statement. Okay, my balance that I got here is a debit of $1,483. My credit balance is easy to add up. I simply have $2,160. Now I'm going to add up my balance sheet debit column. I get a total for my debit column of $8,387. And then I'm going to add up my credit column. And I get $7,710. Okay, so now that I have those, remember these are not going to equal right now. Our debit and credits for those two are not going to equal. So I'm going to grade step 1. Next step. For step number 2, I need to calculate and record the net income or the net loss. And I'm going to label the amount in the account title column. I'm going to also total the income statement and balance sheet column. So To find if I have a net income or a net loss, I need to find the difference between my two columns. I'm going to start with my income statement columns. Here, my larger number is the credit, so I'm going to take 2160 minus that debit balance of 1,483. And here I get 677. So I would need to add 677 to the smaller number to make those two numbers equal. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing over here and make sure I get the same number. So I'm going to take my larger number, my debit number of 8,387, minus my credit of 7,710. I also get 677. Remember, if the numbers are on the outside, that is a label of a net income. Other way I can look at that is this number here is my sales. This number here is my expenses. This shows that my sales is larger than my expenses, therefore that's a net income. If I would have my two numbers on these inside columns, that would be a net loss. Okay, now I need to make sure that my net income, debit, and credit's equal, so I'm going to add these two numbers together. So 677 plus that 1483. I now have 2160. This number I'll carry down. So now my income statement, debit, and credit equal. I'm going to do the same thing with the balance sheet. This number simply is 8,387. I'm going to add these two numbers. And oops. And I now have 8,387. Okay, so my income statement, debit, and credit equal. My balance sheet, debit, and credit equal. Grade final step. Now complete the 6.3 on your own, and then go to the 6.4 lecture video.